My dad yelled at my grandpa, "Pay the rent or get out." So Grandpa smiled and left. He didn't know Grandpa owned the house. Grandpa secretly sold it for $900,000. When Dad found out, he called in a panic, but Grandpa's answer shocked him. The night my dad screamed at my grandpa, I swear the walls shook. "Pay the rent or get out," he shouted, his face red, his veins pulsing like he wanted to tear the house apart. Grandpa didn't fight back. He just stood there, his cane steady, his eyes calm, almost pitying. Then, without a word, he smiled and turned away. That smile scared me more than the yelling. The next morning, Grandpa was gone. No note, no suitcase missing, just silence and the strange feeling that something enormous had just shifted. Dad called it an old man drama. But 3 days later, a letter came in the mail. It wasn't from Grandpa. It was from a real estate firm. And when Dad opened it, his face turned white. Grandpa hadn't run away. He'd sold the house for $900,000, and what he told Dad next would burn itself into my memory forever. I used to think our house was unbreakable. Strong bones, solid walls, sunlight that slid through the kitchen window every morning just right. My grandpa built it with his own hands 40 years ago, and even after Grandma died, it was still his masterpiece. He used to say, "A home is a promise, not just a place, but promises fade, especially when pride moves in." After my divorce, I came back home thinking I'd stay a few months. Dad called it temporary, though he liked the convenience of my paycheck helping around the house. Mom was thrilled to have me close again. Grandpa didn't say much, just smiled, poured me coffee, and said, "Don't worry, kiddo. The house still fits you." For a while, everything seemed fine until Dad started losing clients. He ran a small construction firm. Ironic, considering Grandpa had taught him everything about building. But while Grandpa built things steady and honest, Dad built on loans and shortcuts. The stress made him meaner. I'd catch him pacing the kitchen late at night, muttering, property, taxes, utilities, repairs, and the old man just sits there like a king in the basement. Mom would whisper, "He's your father, Rick, show some respect." And Dad would snap, "Respect doesn't pay bills, Margaret." The first time I heard him say that, my stomach turned. Grandpa did pay the bills. He'd quietly handled property taxes for years, even helped cover my college loans, but he never said it out loud. He just didn't need people to know. That humble dad mistook it for weakness. Every dinner became another battlefield disguised as a family meal. Forks clinking, silence stretching, Dad's tone sharp as wire. Maybe Dad could pitch in more now that he's retired. "Rick," Mom warned, "he already does." "Oh, really? How about rent then?" Grandpa would just fold his napkin neatly and say, "You can't charge someone rent for what they built, son." That always made Dad's face darken. He'd grab his plate, storm off, and slam the door to his office upstairs. The house would rattle like it remembered when he was still a boy, throwing tantrums in those same halls. I'd go downstairs sometimes, bringing Grandpa tea. His room smelled like cedar and old books. He'd be at his drafting table, still sketching things, bridges, porches, the occasional birdhouse. He'd look up at me with tired eyes and say, "You can't argue with someone who confuses control with love." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. But that week, something changed. Dad's frustration wasn't just words anymore. He started talking about converting the basement into a rental unit. If he wants to live there, he said he'll start paying like a tenant. Mom tried to stop him, but Dad was already measuring walls, running his hands along the railing Grandpa built. The house that once echoed with laughter now creaked under tension. And though I didn't know it yet, that was the last week any of us would live there together as a family. Because some houses don't collapse from storms, they crumble from the noise inside. It started like every other Friday. Quiet, uneasy. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until even a sigh feels too loud. Mom had made roast chicken. Grandpa set the table like always, careful and slow. Dad came home late, shoulders tense. Tie loosened, eyes already stormy. I could smell the whiskey before he even spoke. He didn't sit down right away. He just stood at the end of the table, staring at Grandpa. "You didn't pay the water bill this month," he said flatly. Grandpa looked up. "I paid it last week. Check the receipts," I checked. "And the name on the bill isn't even mine. It's still yours, isn't it? You never transferred it." Mom whispered. "Rick, not now," but it was too late. Dad slammed his fist against the table, the plates rattling. "This is my house, Dad." My responsibility. You live here for free and you don't even respect that enough to let me handle the bills. Grandpa's voice was calm, almost too calm. Your house, you're sure about that? Dad sneered. I pay the mortgage, the maintenance, everything. So yeah, I'm sure. Grandpa leaned back, folding his hands. You pay a mortgage on land that was never yours. The title still has my name, Rick. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Mom's fort clinkegged against her plate. Dad's face turned crimson. That's a lie. Grandpa shrugged lightly. Check for yourself. Then came the explosion. Dad's chair screeched back. He jabbed a finger at Grandpa, voice breaking with rage. I've had enough of your games. You're a guest here. You hear me? Pay the rent or get out. The words cracked through the air like lightning. I dropped my glass. It shattered against the tile. Mom gasped. Grandpa didn't flinch. He just looked at Dad, not angry, not hurt, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from watching someone you love lose himself piece by piece. Then he stood using his cane to steady himself. All right, he said quietly. I'll get out. Mom grabbed his arm, panicked. Dad, please, he didn't mean, but Grandpa gently moved her hand away. He meant every word. He turned to me next. For a moment, his eyes softened. Camilla, you take care of your mother. Don't let this house eat you, too. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. He walked toward the basement door, his steps slow but certain. When he reached the stairs, he turned back one last time and looked at my father. That same faint smile, calm, knowing almost victory, crossed his face. You can keep your house, Rick. But remember, a house isn't worth much when it forgets who built it. He disappeared down the stairs. Dad muttered something under his breath, but the sound of that door closing was louder than anything he could have said. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last night Grandpa ever slept under our roof, and the night my father started losing everything he thought he owned. The next morning felt wrong before I even opened my eyes. The house was too quiet. No faint hum of the coffee maker. No soft shuffle of Grandpa's slippers across the kitchen tiles. Mom was already awake, pacing. He didn't sleep in his room, she said, her voice thin. His bed's made. His shoes are here, but he's gone. Dad didn't even look up from his phone. He's probably walking it off. You know how dramatic he gets. But I knew better. Grandpa was many things. Patient, quiet, stubborn, but never careless. He always left notes. Always. I went downstairs. The air in the basement was cold, still smelling faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco. His jacket still hung by the door. His wallet sat on the dresser. Only one thing was missing. The framed photo of Grandma holding baby Dad on the front porch of this very house. That detail twisted in my chest. By noon, Mom had called the hospital, the police, and every neighbor in 3 blocks. Nothing. No one had seen him. Dad grew more irritated than worried. He's an old man. Maybe he went to a friend's place. He'll crawl back once he realizes I wasn't bluffing. Mom stared at him in disbelief. Rick, he's your father. Yeah, and he's been treating me like a child since I was 10. Maybe a little space will remind him who's in charge. The words made me sick. I went outside, standing in the garden Grandpa loved. His roses had bloomed perfectly, deep red, petals soft as memory. I swear the air itself felt like it missed him. 3 days passed. No calls, no letters, not even a sign. Then on the 4th morning, an envelope came through the mail slot, thick, white, official-looking, addressed to Mr. Richard Hale. Mom picked it up first. It's from Edison and Blake Real Estate Associates, she murmured. Dad frowned. Probably junk. He tore it open anyway. The color drained from his face before he even finished reading. What? I asked. He looked at me, his voice trembling. It says the property has been sold. Closed, paid in full. Mom took the letter from his hands, scanning the lines. Notification of completed sale. 112 Maple Drive. Transfer of property finalized under owner Raymond Hale. Buyer possession scheduled for 30 days from closing date. Raymond Hale, my grandpa. Dad stumbled back like the air had punched him. No, that's impossible. I own this house. Mom's voice broke. Rick, you never changed the deed. It's still under your father's name. Silence. Only the ticking clock filled at the sound of seconds mocking him. Dad threw the letter on the floor. He can't do this. He can't just sell my house out from under me. I knelt, picking it up carefully. The ink smelled new. The signature is unmistakably his steady, deliberate. That's when it hit me. Grandpa hadn't run away. He'd moved on and he'd taken the house with him. The man my father tried to evict had just evicted us all. Dad didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room with the letter spread across the coffee table, reading and rereading it like the words might magically change. His fingers left sweaty prints on the paper. Mom tried to reason with him. Rick, maybe he just wanted to move somewhere smaller. He's old. Maybe he needed the money, but Dad wasn't listening. Smaller, he sold this house. My house, his voice cracked. You don't just sell your son's home out of spite. I wanted to say it wasn't spite, it was consequence, but I stayed quiet. I'd never seen my dad unravel like that. He was pacing, muttering half-sentences. He can't have legal ownership. I've lived here for years. This is theft. Mom reached out to calm him, but he brushed her off and stormed upstairs. Mom sighed. Camilla, he's going to do something stupid. She was right. The next morning, Dad was already on the phone with banks and lawyers. I heard the same line repeated again and again. There must be a mistake. My father's name shouldn't still be on the deed. Each time the answer came back colder, more final. Sir, the public record lists Raymond Hale as sole owner. The sale is legally binding. By noon, his voice was horseshoe. He called the real estate office next. I could hear every word through the wall. You had no right to sell this house. Mr. Hale did, sir. He's the registered owner. The transaction is complete, but I live here. Then you'll need to vacate before the possession date. The line went dead. He came out of his office looking older, smaller somehow. Mom tried to touch his arm, but he pulled away. He wanted to humiliate me. That's what this is. I shook my head. He warned you, Dad. He glared at me, eyes bloodshot. Don't start, Camilla, but I couldn't stop myself. You told him to pay rent or get out. He did both. His mouth opened, then closed again. No words, just rage simmering behind his silence. That afternoon, movers showed up not for us, but to deliver inspection paperwork. The buyers were scheduled to take possession in 30 days. Mom read the letter aloud, hands trembling. The new owners will assume occupancy September 1st. Dad crumpled the page, his voice low and broken, over my dead body. But even as he said it, I saw the truth in his eyes he'd lost. When night came, he sat alone on the porch, staring at the dark garden Grandpa once tended. The roses were wilting without care. I stepped outside quietly. He didn't look up when he spoke. You think he's proud of himself? You think he's laughing right now? I didn't answer. I just whispered, maybe he's finally at peace. Dad turned toward me, his expression hollow. Peace. He destroyed me. And for the first time in my life, I realized my father wasn't angry because he'd lost a house. He was angry because he'd been outsmarted by the man who built it. 3 days passed before Grandpa finally called. Mom was in the kitchen making tea when the old landline rang, the one Grandpa had installed himself decades ago. She froze mid-motion. Dad snatched the phone off the counter before the second ring. Dad, where the hell are you? Grandpa calm. Good morning, Rick. You sound tired. Dad tired? You sold my house? Grandpa, I sold my house, the one I built. The one you told me to pay rent for. I sat at the table, staring, heart-hammering. Mom whispered, put it on speaker. Maybe wail. Dad jabbed the button, breathing heavy. Grandpa, you said pay the rent or get out. So I got out. Dad, you blindsided me. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? Grandpa, I know exactly. I gave you a mirror, Rick. One you've avoided for years. Dad's knuckles whitened around the phone. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Grandpa chuckled softly. Enjoyment isn't the word. Satisfaction, maybe. Seeing my son learn that arrogance is expensive. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad, please, Rick's just he's hurt. Maybe we can talk, figure something out. Grandpa, Margaret, I've spent 40 years figuring things out for him. He's 45 now. It's time he figures out what respect costs. Dad slammed his hand on the table. You had no right, Grandpa. I had every right. I built that house before you were born. You called it yours, but you never earned it. You tried to evict me, and now life has a sense of humor. Dad's voice cracked. You betrayed me, Grandpa. No, son. Betrayal is demanding rent from the man who raised you. This is justice. The room went silent. Even the air seemed afraid to move. Finally, Grandpa's tone softened. I didn't do this to punish you, Rick. I did it to protect myself. I realized something that night. You don't love people you try to own. Dad looked like he'd been punched. He sank into a chair, face pale. Grandpa, I left you the life. You chose a house without gratitude. I hope someday you build something stronger. Then came the sound of a soft click. The line went dead. Mom covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. I stood frozen, heart aching with something between anger and awe. Dad didn't move. The phone sat on the table, still blinking red from the call. He whispered, "He planned this, all of it." I looked at him. The man who once towered over everyone, now smaller than I'd ever seen. "He didn't plan it, Dad," I said softly. "You did the night you yelled at him to get out." He looked up at me, and for a brief second, I saw something raw flicker behind his anger regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Don't ever take his side, Camilla," he muttered, storming out of the room. I didn't answer because deep down I already had. The next few weeks felt like living inside a storm that refused to pass. Dad barely left his office. The door stayed shut, the blinds drawn. I'd hear him muttering to himself, angry bursts of words, lawyer's fraud, appeal not over yet. Mom tried to coax him out with coffee, but he'd just wave her away like smoke. Meanwhile, boxes began appearing in corners of the living room. Not ours, the buyers. They were scheduling inspections, sending notices. The countdown had started. Mom cried quietly while packing dishes. 30 days, she said. That's all we have left. Dad slammed a drawer shut. We're not leaving. He can't legally force us out. But he could, and he had. When the eviction notice came from the new owners, Dad tore it in half, shouting, "They can drag me out in handcuffs before I move a damn thing." Mom flinched, clutching the counter for balance. "Rick, please stop. You're scaring me." That night I found her sitting in the dark kitchen, tears tracing down her face. "He's not angry at your grandfather," she whispered. "He's angry at himself, but he'll never admit it." I didn't reply. I didn't know how to tell her that Grandpa hadn't just sold a house, he'd broken a curse. 3 days later, Dad came home from another meeting with his lawyer. He tossed a folder onto the table. They all say the same thing. No claim, no title, no case. He laughed, a hard, hollow sound. Imagine that. My own father outsmarted me. He poured whiskey into a glass, hand trembling. "You think he planned this for years, just waiting for me to slip." I met his gaze. "I think he hoped you'd never make him need to." He didn't answer. He just stared at the amber in his glass like it held an explanation. The day the movers came for the first inspection, Dad stood in the doorway, jaw tight, arms crossed. "They're not stepping 1 foot inside," he growled. But they did calmly, legally. The woman leading the team smiled politely. "We're just taking measurements for the new owners. You'll receive the final notice soon." Mom apologized on his behalf, voice shaking. "We'll be ready. We understand." That night I walked past the garden. The roses were dying brown edges, petals curling inward. Grandpa had always said roses needed care and forgiveness. They'd gotten neither. Later I heard Dad crying. Not loud, not angry, just quiet, exhausted sobs. I stood outside his office door, unsure whether to knock. He murmured, "He destroyed me." I wanted to say, "No, Dad. He set you free from your own cruelty." But the words stuck in my throat. When I went downstairs, Mom was asleep on the couch, arms wrapped around one of Grandpa's old sweaters she'd found in a drawer. I sat beside her, feeling the weight of everything that had been said, everything that couldn't be taken back. For years, I'd thought the house was our foundation. Now I realized it was our cage, and the only one strong enough to break the lock had already walked away. A month after the sale closed, I finally found him. The address was scribbled on the back of an envelope. Mom had left on the counter a return address from one of Grandpa's letters to the bank. I didn't tell Dad where I was going. I just drove, heart-pounding. The city rolling past in a blur of brick and sun. The apartment was small, tucked above a quiet florist's shop. A row of roses bloomed on the balcony, the same deep crimson he used to grow in our garden. Of course they did. Grandpa never left anything behind. He just replanted it somewhere new. When I knocked, the door opened halfway before I even spoke. He was there, thinner, maybe, but brighter somehow. The years of tension that had shadowed his face were gone. "Comma," he said softly, smiling. "I was wondering how long it would take you. I shouldn't have waited this long," I whispered. He stepped aside. "Come in, sweetheart." The place smelled like coffee and cedar like home. A small drafting table sat by the window, a pot of brushes beside it. On the wall hung a framed sketch of the house he'd built, our house signed at the bottom. "Our Hale 1982. I kept the original," he said, following my gaze. "Can't rebuild a life without remembering how it started." I nodded, trying to find words that didn't sound small. "Dad's not doing well." I know, he said. Pride always comes with a hangover. Do you hate him? I asked quietly. Grandpa looked out toward the balcony, his voice steady. Hate, no, I pity him. He's been trying to own things his whole life because he never learned how to belong. Something in my chest cracked open. He thinks you destroyed him. He turned back, eyes kind but sharp. No, Camilla, I freed him. He just doesn't know it yet. We sat for a while, sipping coffee. Outside, a soft breeze brushed the roses against the railing, petals fluttering like tiny red flags of truce. I told him about Mom, how she cried while packing, how she still kept his old sweaters in a box labeled "Do Not Touch." He smiled faintly. Your mother has the gentlest heart I've ever met. Tell her she's forgiven, though she never owed me an apology. I hesitated. Will you ever talk to Dad again? Grandpa's fingers tapped lightly on his mug. When he stopped shouting long enough to listen, he studied me then, really looked at me. You've changed, he said. You used to think fixing people meant saving them. Not anymore, I said quietly. He smiled proud, warm. The kind of smile that made you believe time could heal anything. Good, then maybe there's hope for both of you. When I left, he walked me to the door. The afternoon sun spilled across his face, and for a moment I saw not the old man Dad had yelled at, but the builder, the man who knew how to start over. Comma, he said before I stepped into the hallway. Don't inherit resentment, inherit awareness. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I will, Grandpa, I promise. And for the first time in years, that promise felt like something worth keeping. 2 months later, Dad finally asked for Grandpa's address. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. The boxes were gone, the house was empty, and we were living in a cramped rental on the edge of town, a place that smelled like dust and regret. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the rent notice, his eyes hollow. Camilla, he said quietly, I think I need to see him. I didn't ask why. I just handed him the folded slip of paper I'd kept in my wallet since that day I visited Grandpa. He stared at it for a long time before whispering. He always said, pride doesn't build homes, maybe I should have listened. When he left, Mom squeezed my hand, tears brimming. Do you think your father will apologize? I think, I said softly. He already has by going. Grandpa told me about their meeting later. They'd met at a small diner by the river, the same place Grandpa used to take me for pancakes when I was little. He said Dad looked older than he remembered. Shoulders slumped, hands restless on the table. Dad, you win. Grandpa, this wasn't a game, son. Dad, it felt like one. Grandpa, only because you kept score. They sat in silence after that. The waitress poured them coffee and neither touched it. Finally, Dad whispered, Why did you really do it, Grandpa? Because you stopped seeing me as family, Rick. You saw me as rent, Dad. I was angry, scared. The business was falling apart and I thought if I could control something, anything, Grandpa, you'd feel safe. Dad's voice cracked. I thought I was protecting my family. Grandpa, protection isn't ownership, it's stewardship. You forgot the difference. Grandpa told me there was a long silence, then the kind that doesn't need words to say, I'm sorry. When they finally parted, Dad didn't shake his hand. He hugged him. That night, Dad came home quiet. He sat across from me and said he sold the house to a young couple. Said they needed it more than we did. I nodded. That sounds like him. He exhaled, his voice breaking. He told me something I can't stop thinking about, that I was never meant to inherit a house, just the lesson of how to keep one standing. I smiled faintly. Did you understand what he meant? He nodded. Yeah, respect. That's the rent I never paid. The words hung between us like the soft echo of peace returning after a long war. Weeks later, I visited Grandpa again. He was sitting on the balcony, painting the view, the skyline, the river, the light catching the roses he'd nurtured back to life. I told him what Dad said. He smiled, still focused on the brushstroke. Then maybe my job here's done. The air smelled of roses and turpentine, sunlight pooling on the table. I sat beside him and for once there was no tension, no guilt, just quiet understanding. Grandpa, I said, you didn't just build a house. You built us back from the ruins. He looked at me, eyes warm, the corners crinkling with pride. That's all any builder can hope for. And as I watched the paint dry under the afternoon light, I realized the house was never the story we were. Because some homes aren't made of wood or walls. They're made of the people who finally learn how to stay.